My name is Allie Wilson, 34 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought family meant unconditional love and support. That changed the night I woke to the sound of splintering wood and saw my brother, father, and uncle standing in my bedroom doorway wielding baseball bats. The home I'd worked so hard for, the one thing truly mine, had become their target because I refused to sell it to pay off their gambling debts. Before I tell you what happened that terrifying night, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to follow my journey to justice. I grew up in a small town just outside of Pittsburgh, in a household where chaos was the only constant. My father, Jack, was what people politely called financially challenged, but the reality was much darker. He had a gambling problem that created a constant state of instability for our family. One week, we would have new toys and restaurant dinners, and the next week, our electricity would be shut off. My mother was the glue that somehow held everything together, working double shifts as a nurse to cover the bills my father couldn't pay. She was my rock, my inspiration, teaching me the value of hard work and independence. But when I was 16, she was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Within 8 months, she was gone, leaving me to not only process my grief, but also to take care of my younger brother Tommy, who was only 12 at the time. With Mom gone, Dad's gambling got worse. There were strangers coming to our door demanding money, threatening phone calls in the middle of the night, and more than once we had to quickly pack up and move to a new rental when Dad couldn't pay the rent. Through all of this, I made a promise to myself: someday I would have stability. I would own my own home, a place where no one could kick me out, a sanctuary that was truly mine. I worked multiple jobs all through high school. Waitressing at the local diner in the mornings before school, retail at the mall on weekends, and tutoring younger kids in math whenever I could squeeze it in. Every dollar I earned went into a secret savings account my mother had helped me set up before she passed. By some miracle and a lot of late-night studying, I managed to earn a scholarship to the State University for accounting. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I can still remember my father's mixture of pride and resentment when I left. Tommy was left with him, but I called every day and sent money home when I could. After graduating, I landed a job at Wilson & Associates, a respected accounting firm in the city. I continued living like a college student, renting a tiny studio apartment, eating ramen noodles, and saving every possible penny. For 6 years, I lived this way, watching my savings grow, while maintaining just enough contact with my family to make sure Tommy was okay. Then at 30, I found it. A small 3-bedroom craftsman house with original woodwork, hardwood floors under old carpet, and a yard big enough for the garden I'd always dreamed of planting. It needed work, a lot of work, but the bones were good, and the price was within my reach, thanks to years of frugal living. The day I signed those mortgage papers was the proudest moment of my life. I took a picture of myself holding the keys and had it framed. For the next 4 years, I poured every spare moment and dollar into renovating that house with my own hands. I learned to replace drywall from YouTube videos, sanded floors on weekends, and painted every surface myself. Slowly, the house transformed, just as I did, growing stronger and more confident with each completed project. The kitchen became my pride and joy, with cabinets I refinished myself and a vintage farmhouse sink I found at a salvage yard. The backyard transformed into a garden oasis with native plants and a small vegetable patch. My home became my sanctuary, the physical embodiment of the security I had craved since childhood. During those years, my relationship with my family remained strained but functional. Tommy had moved out of Dad's place and was supposedly working construction jobs, though they never seemed to last. Dad would call occasionally, usually when he needed something, but the requests were small enough that I could manage them without too much stress. Last year, I received a promotion at work to senior accountant, which came with a significant salary increase. For the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. I had my house and emergency fund, and was even starting to build a retirement account. Little did I know that my newfound stability would soon make me a target for the very people who should have been happiest for me. It started with increased frequency in their visits. Dad would just be in the neighborhood and drop by unannounced. Tommy would call to catch up more often than his usual once-a-month check-in. My father's brother, Uncle Rick, who I'd barely seen since Mom's funeral, suddenly remembered he had a niece. At first, I was touched. I thought perhaps they were finally making an effort to be a real family again. I cooked dinners when they visited, listened to their stories, and shared modest updates about my life and career. Then came the first request. "Allie, sweetheart," my father said one evening after I'd made his favorite pasta dinner. "I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot this month. Could you spare $500 just until my disability check comes through?" Against my better judgment, I wrote him a check. 2 weeks later, Tommy needed $1,000 to fix his truck so he could get to work. Then Uncle Rick needed help with a medical bill. The amounts grew, as did the frequency of the requests. One afternoon, while sorting through my mail, I found several envelopes addressed to my father. Confused, I opened one to discover it was a credit card statement for an account I knew nothing about with a balance of over $12,000. The address listed was mine. I confronted my father immediately. "What is this? Why are you using my address for credit cards?" "It's just temporary, Allie," he explained, his voice carrying that smooth tone I'd heard him use with creditors over the years. "My credit is shot because of some misunderstandings. I just needed a stable address for the applications. I'm paying the bills, aren't I?" He wasn't, of course. The statement showed 3 months of missed minimum payments. After a heated argument, he promised to stop using my address and to pay off the accounts. I made him call the credit card company right there in my kitchen to change the address. Around this time, I began noticing other troubling signs. Tommy claimed to be working steady construction jobs, but his knowledge of current projects seemed vague when I asked specific questions. Then I ran into his former supervisor at the grocery store, who mentioned Tommy had been let go months earlier. When confronted, Tommy broke down. He admitted he'd been gambling with Dad, convinced they had a system that would pay off big. They just needed a little more time and money to make it work. Then came the first major ask. They needed $20,000 for an emergency debt to unnamed creditors. After much arguing and against every instinct, I liquidated part of my emergency fund to help them, but with strict conditions. They would sign a repayment agreement, attend Gamblers Anonymous, and I would have access to their bank statements. They agreed to everything, signed the papers, and even attended 2 GA meetings. Then they stopped returning my calls. The repayment checks never came. Strange cars began driving slowly past my house. Once a man I didn't know approached me in my front yard, asking if I was Jack Wilson's daughter. When I reluctantly confirmed, he just nodded and said, "He mentioned you might be helping him out with some cash. That's real nice of you." The implied threat hung in the air between us. A week later, I came home to find my side window broken. Nothing was stolen, but a framed photo of me and my mother had been moved from the mantel to the kitchen table. When the police came, they dismissed it as random vandalism, but I knew better. Someone had been in my home sending me a message. I began to realize that my family's problems were far bigger and more dangerous than they were admitting. Something had to give, and soon. 3 days later, I received a text from my father. "Family dinner at my place, 7 p.m. Friday. Important to have everyone together. Please come." The formality of the invitation felt staged and unlike him. Still, I went hoping perhaps they were finally ready to make real changes. When I arrived at my father's small rental house, the atmosphere was tense. Tommy couldn't meet my eyes, and Dad seemed simultaneously nervous and oddly relieved. Uncle Rick was there, along with a man I'd never seen before, introduced only as Frank, a business associate. Frank was in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in my father's shabby living room. His handshake was too firm, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. I instantly felt uncomfortable in his presence. After an awkward dinner where everyone except Frank barely touched their food, my father cleared his throat. "Allie, we need to talk about something important." He began, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Frank here has been very patient with us, but we've run into some financial difficulties." Frank smiled thinly. "Your father and brother owe me $150,000. I nearly choked on my water. "What? How is that even possible?" Interest accumulates quickly when payments are missed, Frank said smoothly. Your family has been borrowing from me for quite some time. My father jumped in. We have a solution, though. That's why we wanted to talk to you. The solution, as they called it, was for me to sell my house, my home, the one thing I'd worked for my entire adult life. They had already looked into property values in my neighborhood and determined I could get at least $200,000 for it, enough to pay off Frank and have a little left over to start fresh. You can stay with me until you get back on your feet, my father offered, as if he were doing me a favor. I sat in stunned silence as they laid out their plan. When I finally found my voice, it was shaking with anger. Absolutely not. This is insane. I'm not selling my house to pay off your gambling debts. Uncle Rick leaned forward. Allie, this isn't just about money. Frank's associates aren't the patient type. People could get hurt. Your mother would want you to help family, my father added, bringing her into this despicable conversation. That was the breaking point. Don't you dare use Mom to manipulate me, I said, standing up. She would be disgusted by what you're asking. Tommy, who had been silent until now, suddenly burst out, You think you're so perfect with your nice house and fancy job. What about us? You owe us. Who took care of you when Mom died? You're so selfish. My father's face transformed into something I barely recognized, twisted with anger and desperation. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by leaving your family to the wolves. Frank stood straightening his jacket. I can see this is a family matter you need to discuss privately. I'll give you 1 week to come to the right decision. He handed me his business card. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable, for everyone's sake. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. As soon as he left, I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. My father blocked my path. You're not walking away from this, Allie. Family helps family. That's how it works. This isn't help, I said, pushing past him. This is exploitation, and it stops now. The next week was a nightmare of escalating hostility. Dozens of calls and text messages from all three of them, alternating between threats, guilt trips, and occasional desperate pleas. I blocked their numbers, but they created new ones. They showed up at my workplace, creating scenes in the lobby until security escorted them out. My boss, Linda, called me into her office after the second incident. Instead of reprimanding me, she offered support. Whatever's happening, Allie, you don't have to face it alone, she said. If you need time off or legal help, just say the word. I took her advice and consulted an attorney about restraining orders. I also hired a security company to install cameras and changed all my locks. For the first time, I truly understood that my own family had become a danger to me. Despite my precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending disaster. Each night, I checked and rechecked the locks, windows, and security system before trying to sleep. On the 6th night after the dinner with Frank, exhaustion finally won out, and I fell into a deep sleep around midnight. At 2 a.m, I jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass, followed by the sickening crack of splintering wood. Before I could fully process what was happening, my bedroom door burst open. There they stood, 3 men I had once called family, transformed into strangers. My father, Jack, his face contorted with rage. Uncle Rick, cold and calculating. And my brother Tommy, eyes wild and unfocused. Each held a baseball bat. Get up, my father commanded. We're going to the bank first thing in the morning. You're going to take out a home equity loan, or we'll make sure you don't have a home to come back to. The smell of alcohol filled the room. They were drunk, disheveled, desperate men who no longer resembled the family I once knew. You've lost your minds, I said, reaching slowly for my phone on the nightstand. Uncle Rick saw the movement and lurched forward, swinging his bat down onto my bedside lamp, shattering it and sending my phone flying across the room. No calls, he growled. This is family business. What happened next was like a tornado tearing through my home. They began smashing everything in sight. The antique mirror in the hallway that I'd restored myself. The bookshelf filled with my favorite novels. Each crack of wood or shatter of glass felt like a physical blow. You think you're better than us? my father shouted, overturning the coffee table I'd refinished. "Living in your perfect little house while we struggle." They made their way to the dining room, where my mother's china cabinet stood. It was one of the few things I'd inherited from her, filled with the dishes she'd collected over the years. "Please, not that," I begged. "It was Mom's." My father looked directly at me as he swung the bat. The sound of breaking glass and porcelain cutting through the air. Pieces of my mother's legacy scattered across the floor. As they continued their rampage, something unexpected happened. Tommy, in the midst of destroying a wall I'd recently painted, suddenly stopped. His face crumpled and he began to sob. "This is wrong," he cried. "Dad, this is wrong." Uncle Rick ignored him methodically, opening drawers and cabinets looking for valuables. Finding my emergency cash box in the kitchen, he pried it open and pocketed the $800 inside. Taking advantage of their momentary distraction, I locked myself in the bathroom and called 911 with the spare phone I kept hidden in the medicine cabinet. I whispered my address and situation to the dispatcher, my voice shaking. "Please hurry. They have bats. They're destroying everything." The minutes waiting for police felt like hours. Outside the bathroom, the destruction continued. I could hear the crack of bats against walls, furniture being overturned, glass breaking. Then my father's fists pounding on the bathroom door. "Open up, Allie. You can't hide from family." The doorframe began to splinter under the force of his blows. Just as I thought the door would give way, silence suddenly fell. Then in the distance, sirens. "This isn't over." My father's voice came through the cracking door. "You think the police can protect you forever? We know where you live, where you work. Family takes care of family one way or another." Heavy footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of the back door slamming. By the time police arrived, they were gone, but the evidence of their violence remained. Officer Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, carefully documented the destruction while her partner secured the broken doors and windows as best they could. "You can't stay here tonight," she said gently. "Is there someone you can call?" There wasn't. The people who should have been my support system were the very ones who had violated my sanctuary. I spent the night in a hotel room, staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes, without seeing my father's rage-filled face or hearing the sound of my mother's china shattering. The next morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes, I met with Detective Johnson, who specialized in family violence cases. His office was small but organized with children's drawings taped to one wall. The simple normalcy of it made my situation feel even more surreal. "Unfortunately, what you're describing isn't uncommon," he said after I'd recounted everything. "Family financial abuse often escalates when the victim tries to establish boundaries." He showed me files with names redacted of similar cases. As I read through them, a chilling pattern emerged. One of the cases involved an elderly woman whose son and nephew had systematically drained her savings. The tactics described were eerily similar to what my family had been doing. "Your father and uncle have done this before," Detective Johnson said quietly. "There are reports from 2 other relatives going back 5 years. They never pressed charges. I did. That afternoon, I formally charged all 3 of them with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and assault. Detective Johnson assured me they would be found and arrested quickly. The following day, I received a text from Tommy from a number I didn't recognize. "Can we meet just us? I need to talk to you. Benny's coffee shop at 2. Against my better judgment, I agreed but took precautions. I asked a coworker to come with me and sit at a nearby table, and I alerted Detective Johnson about the meeting. Tommy was already there when I arrived, hunched over a coffee cup, looking even worse than he had during the break-in. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands shaking slightly. "I'm so sorry, Allie," he said as soon as I sat down. What I did, it was unforgivable." "Where are Dad and Uncle Rick?" I asked, ignoring his apology for the moment. "Hiding out at some motel. They're scared, Allie. Not of the cops, but of Frank." Tommy then revealed the true depth of their trouble. Frank Marino wasn't just any loan shark. He was connected to organized crime figures in Pittsburgh and had a reputation for extreme measures when debts weren't paid. Dad and Uncle Rick have been borrowing from him for years, Tommy explained. At first it was just Dad. Then he got Uncle Rick involved. They pulled me in last year, said they had a system that couldn't fail. Tommy had decided to cooperate with the authorities, not just about our family, but about Frank Marino's entire operation. He was meeting with the district attorney the next day. "I know it doesn't fix anything," he said, tears streaming down his face. "But I want to make this right. Somehow." I made a difficult decision in that coffee shop. I would help Tommy get into a treatment program for his gambling addiction, but I wouldn't drop the charges against any of them. Love didn't mean enabling destruction. That evening I received an unexpected call from my mother's sister, Aunt Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, my father having driven a wedge between Mom's family and us after her death. "I just heard what happened from an old neighbor," she said. "Oh, Allie, I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder to stay in your life." Aunt Sarah revealed a history I'd never known. My father had systematically alienated anyone who might have offered us support or stability. He had borrowed money from my mother's family for years, never repaying until they finally had to cut ties to protect themselves. "Your mother stayed with him hoping he would change," Aunt Sarah explained. "She made me promise not to tell you children how bad things really were." With Aunt Sarah back in my life, I felt stronger. The security company completed installation of a comprehensive system at my home, including panic buttons and motion sensors. The court granted a temporary restraining order against my father-uncle, and reluctantly my brother, though I made exceptions for Tommy's treatment program meetings. Despite these protections, anonymous threatening notes began appearing on my car at work. "Family problems should stay in the family. Snitches get stitches. Nobody likes a rat." The stress became too much. After finding the third note, I broke down in Linda's office. She immediately arranged for me to take a paid leave of absence. "Your job will be waiting when you're ready," she assured me. "In the meantime, focus on staying safe and rebuilding." My coworkers organized a meal train and weekend renovation help crews. For the first time, I understood that family could be chosen, built from people who genuinely cared. 2 weeks after the break-in, my father and uncle were arrested attempting to cross state lines. Their arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. I sat in the back of the courtroom, Aunt Sarah beside me for support, as they were led in wearing handcuffs. They looked smaller somehow, diminished without their rage and alcohol-fueled bravado. When they saw me, my father's face registered shock. He had genuinely believed I would drop the charges, that family loyalty would outweigh everything they had done. The prosecutor laid out the charges: breaking and entering, destruction of property, assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats. Their court-appointed attorney tried to paint it as a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. "These men were merely trying to help their daughter and niece see reason," he argued. "There was no intent to cause harm." The security footage from my home told a different story. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and the violent nature of the crime. Tommy, as part of his plea agreement for reduced charges, entered a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. He would serve 6 months in a minimum security facility after completing treatment and would be required to testify against our father and uncle. During the discovery phase of the trial, I learned the full extent of my father's gambling debts. Beyond the $150,000 owed to Frank Marino, there were casino debts, payday loans, and credit card balances totaling over $200,000. He had been living in financial quicksand for decades, pulling anyone close enough down with him. More disturbing was the discovery that they had taken out fraudulent loans in my name, using personal information they had access to as family. I spent countless hours working with credit bureaus and fraud departments to clear my name and repair my credit. Meanwhile, the work of rebuilding my damaged home began. The physical repairs were straightforward if expensive. Insurance covered some of it, but the emotional toll of seeing my sanctuary violated was harder to quantify. Each replaced window, each repaired wall became a small victory in reclaiming my space. My neighbors, many of whom I had barely known before, showed up with tools, food, and support. Coworkers spent weekends helping me repair and repaint. Aunt Sarah decided to sell her home in Ohio and move closer, buying a small condo just 10 minutes from me. The preliminary hearing was the hardest day yet. Sitting in the witness stand, I had to recount every detail of that night while looking at the faces of men who should have protected me, not terrorized me. My father showed no remorse, staring at me with cold anger as I testified. Uncle Rick's lawyer attempted to paint me as selfish and uncaring, asking questions about how many times I had refused to help family in need before the incident. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Julia Mendez, shut down this line of questioning quickly. Your Honor, the victim's generosity or lack thereof is not on trial here. The defendant's actions are. Tommy's testimony came next. Thin and pale from his time in rehab, he could barely look at our father as he detailed years of manipulation and escalating financial abuse. He told me family always comes first, Tommy said, his voice breaking. But what he meant was that his needs came first and we were just tools to meet them. The most unexpected development came 3 days into the hearing. Frank Marino was arrested in connection with illegal lending practices and intimidation based partly on information Tommy had provided. The loan shark's arrest led to the discovery of a network of victims, many of whom had been too frightened to come forward. Among them were our second cousins from our father's side, an elderly aunt, and even my father's former business partner. The pattern was always the same: identify family members with assets or good credit, manipulate them with appeals to family loyalty, exploit them until they had nothing left to give, then move on to the next target. Learning I wasn't the only victim oddly helped. It confirmed what Detective Johnson had told me from the beginning. This wasn't about me failing as a daughter or sister. This was about their choices, their addictions, their crimes. 6 months after that terrible night, justice finally came. My father and uncle were sentenced to 4 years in state prison for the break-in and assault charges, with additional time likely to be added for the fraud and financial crimes still being investigated. Tommy completed his rehab program and began rebuilding his life under strict probation terms. We established careful boundaries, monthly lunches in public places. No discussion of money, and regular verification of his continued attendance at Gamblers Anonymous meetings. My house was fully restored, though I made changes. The open floor plan now included security features. The back door was reinforced with steel. The garden where I once grew vegetables now had motion-activated lights. My sanctuary had evolved just as I had. I returned to work with a new perspective and firm boundaries. My experience led me to establish a support group for family members of gambling addicts, creating the community I wished I'd had during the worst times. The path of setting boundaries with toxic family proved difficult but necessary. The first holiday season was the hardest. Traditional family gatherings were replaced with new traditions: Thanksgiving with Aunt Sarah and some friends from work, Christmas morning volunteering at a women's shelter. Through therapy, I began to understand that I had spent my life trying to fix my family to create the stability my mother couldn't. Releasing that impossible burden was both painful and freeing. I found myself drawn to helping others avoid similar situations. I began volunteering at a financial literacy program at the local community center, teaching basic budgeting and warning signs of financial abuse. 6 months into my father's sentence, I visited him in prison. It was a decision my therapist questioned, but one I felt necessary for my own closure. He had aged years in months, the prison environment stripping away whatever charm he had once used to manipulate those around him. "You ruined everything," were his first words to me. "We could have handled Frank together as a family." "No, Dad," I replied calmly. "You ruined everything when you decided your gambling was more important than your daughter's well-being." He had no response to that. We sat in silence for several minutes before I stood to leave. "I forgive you," I said finally. "Not for you, but for me. I'm done carrying your choices." Walking out of that prison, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of responsibility for my father's and uncle's actions was no longer mine to bear. My home now represents not just achievement, but survival and strength. The walls that were once broken have been rebuilt stronger. the garden that was trampled now blooms with resilient perennials that return year after year despite harsh winters. Learning to trust again has been a gradual process, built through new friendships and reconnections with my mother's side of the family. I've discovered that true family supports, rather than exploits, celebrates, rather than envies, builds up, rather than tears down. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. Setting boundaries with family felt like betrayal at first, but became the most loving thing I could do for both myself and them. By refusing to enable their destructive behavior, I offered them their only real chance at change. Today I look to the future with hope-strong boundaries and newfound strength. My home isn't just brick and wood, it's the fortress where I learned that sometimes protecting yourself is the greatest act of self-love. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members for your own well-being? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to follow more stories of resilience, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect yourself even from family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, true family lifts you up. It doesn't tear you down.